Welcome, everyone, to the Duncan Music Lounge. We're at the Kiss 108 offices in Medford, and I'm here with the beautiful Tonya Mezrich and the very handsome Ben Mezrich. They are an absolute power couple, and we're here today because Ben and Tonya have written a children's book series, Charlie Numbers, and I just want to tell you guys how much the two of you have meant to me personally and also to the Billy and Lisa in the Morning Show and to Kiss 108 and to Raising a Reader and to the Greater Boston reading community, right? Let's give them a round of applause. You guys are out there working it constantly. I've told this story before, but I know we have a lot of new people here today. But I started the book club almost a year ago, and I called Ben, and I said, hey, I have this idea about starting a book club, and I thought maybe we could do an event and have our listeners come, and we sit down with a local author, and we chat about what it's like writing books and talk about your next project. And he was like, I'm there, just tell me where to be. So we got him out, we got him to Encore. He'd never been to Encore. And the rest is history. And now we're all here. And I couldn't be more happy to actually be doing a children's book for once. This is our first. So welcome, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we have always been such a huge fan of yours and back in the Maddie days, and we're so excited for this new chapter with Billy. And the book club was just, it just made sense. And we always said, Lisa's going to be better than Oprah.
We can only hope, right?
Yeah, you have an amazing following, so we're excited to be here. My background is actually, I come from a slightly different background. I actually studied dentistry. I'm a dentist.
Yes.
So I don't know if people knew that. And then my career path took me in a few different directions, and I started writing because I was inspired by Ben, who, knew he wanted to be a writer since he was 12. And when the time came when Asher was 2, our son was 2, we thought, oh, hey, maybe he wants to read something of yours before he turns 14. So we thought of this idea of creating this series called Charlie Numbers. And we're excited that this is our 4th book in the series, and the rest was history.
Yeah, and I'm Ben, and Lisa, thank you so much. I've been going on the show for what seems like forever. I started my career going meeting with you. And it kind of launched me in a lot of ways because I've been a writer for a very long time. As Tonya said, I wanted to be a writer since I was 12 years old. And my first book that anybody heard of was called Bringing Down the House, about some MIT kids who made lots of money playing in Vegas. And I came on the show for that book, and the book was really a big hit, made into a movie called 21. And I wrote a book that was made into a movie called The Social Network about Facebook and where that came from. And the kids' book, as Tonya said, we really wanted our kids to be able to read something that we were writing before we got too old to enjoy it. and I always wanted to do a kids' version of the big books I was writing. So it originally started out that whatever adult book I was working on, we would try and put together a kids' version. So this is book 4 of the series, Charlie Numbers and the UFO Bash. And Charlie is a kid in just outside of Boston. Him and his group of friends go to a school in Newton area that we kind of invented. So it's not a real school. It's kind of based on where Tonya went to school when she was a kid, because she remembers her early life more than I remember my early life. So it's about a group of kids who are really good at a bunch of different things. Charlie is great at math, which is how he got the nickname Charlie Numbers. And his friends, and you can see a lot of them on the cover. Kentaro is next to him, and he's brilliant at language and electronics.
And Crystal, who is sort of the ringleader of the team, she is a rock specialist.
A rock specialist, knows every rock that you stumble upon in the yard. And Janice is just brilliant and knows a lot of history and things like that. And they have a friend, Mario, who's an incredible artist.
Marion
is an incredible artist. And it's just really fun to write about, kids solving mysteries. I don't know if any of you, of the adults, remember the Encyclopedia Brown series, but that was kind of what we were thinking of when we started this series. And so we started writing it a few years ago, and this is book 4, which is great. We're going to have a box set of it, which is really, really fun, and we're trying to work on a TV show version of it, which also should be a lot of fun. Should I... How should we...
I wanted to ask you, when you guys decided that you wanted to bring, one of your books into, for children's literature, how long was that process when you guys actually sat down as a couple to write a book? Like, did you do different chapters? Did you think about character development and then come together? Like, how does that process work?
So I guess with every book or every paper that you write, it all starts from an outline. So we kind of brainstorm on the theme of the book, and it was, as Ben was saying, each one of these books is sort of loosely based on one of his adult books.
Right.
So Bringing Down the Mouse was based on Bringing Down the House. Charlie Numbers and the Man in the Moon was based on, I don't know if I can say that title here.
Sex on the Moon.
Sex on the Moon.
Yeah.
About a moon rock heist. And then Charlie Numbers and the Woolly Mammoth was based on Woolly.
So all of these are loosely based on true stories, actual events.
It's all real events and real science and real math, but then kind of done in a more accessible and fun way. And UFOs is something that I wrote a book a while ago called 37th Parallel about a guy in Colorado who investigates UFOs. And I'm sure a lot of you kids kind of know what UFOs are or maybe are interested. It's a topic that I think a lot of kids are interested in.
Absolutely.
And adults now. It's all over the news now about whether could these be real? Are there really aliens coming from other planets and visiting us? Or is it just some crazy conspiracy?
And what the government knows.
Yeah, what people know and what people don't know. And I actually spent many months hanging out with people who really, really believe when I wrote the adult book and chasing down stories that may or may not be real. And so we wrote a kid's version of it, which this is. So a lot of the information in here is actually based in real stuff, but the story itself obviously is, a different.
So when you decided to do it, how long did it take you to kind of get to where you were going to send it to your publisher?
From start to finish, I'd say the whole process is about a year.
Is that pretty standard or is that quick?
That's not quick, I would say. For what we do, the way we work together is we brainstorm an outline together while sitting in a food court somewhere. And then I usually put it into more of an outline, and then Tonya takes a shot at a draft, and that can take anywhere from a couple months to 6 months, depending on how busy our lives are. Yeah. And then I kind of go through it and rework, and then we kind of finish it up. So I would say the writing part of it is only about 4 to 6 months. And then there's editing back and forth with your publisher to get it ready.
So when you present it as a rough draft, have you done a lot of your own editing though, as far as just like, because grammar is just,
Well, grammar. I mean,
right?
Yeah. I mean, I definitely edit in terms of structure and what scenes work and what scenes don't. Grammar, usually comes last.
Yeah, that's mainly the copy editor with the publisher.
Yeah, the publisher will fix that.
It's not a huge detail.
It's not a big deal.
No, it's not a huge detail. But taking out his 4-letter words, that had to be done.
Right. That you might have missed.
When he realized we were writing for 8 to 12-year-olds.
Right. So again, like going back to like the whole process. So it takes a year, and then did you know? So you based it on each one of your adult books.
Right.
So you kind of knew where you were going with the next one and with the next one. So can you tell us what the next book will be?
Yeah, we have to decide. I have a lot of adult books. So
is it going to be?
Go through.
Well, we were going to go off of our pattern, and we had pitched an idea to do a roller coaster book.
Yeah.
Because we were always, the kids are obsessed with roller coasters, and we thought that's, there's a lot of cool science and physics behind the making of a roller coaster. So we might revisit that idea for a 5th book. That wouldn't really be based on one of your books.
Yeah, but we'll see. I mean, we have a lot going on with adult books, so we could do a...
You do have a lot going on.
Social network book for kids?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, did you give it to Asher to read?
Asher
your son.
He's been reading it a little bit. He read some of the earlier ones, and he hasn't read this new one yet, I don't think. So today he'll be getting a copy to read.
Yeah, and Aria, she's a good reader too, so maybe
that
she can
definitely
back 'em up.
helps, right?
They're both shaking their heads.
Yeah, they both very
we need
excited.
to see this movement.
So kind of taking a step back, because we have a lot of young kids here, and that's why we wanted to do this. You wrote your first book when you were 12 years old. Is my memory serving me well?
Okay. Are any of you 12 other than ours?
Yes.
In there, a couple of you kids are 12.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew very early I just wanted to be a writer, and I didn't know how to do it or anything. I just said, I'm going to write a book. And so when I was 12, I sat down and I wrote a book. And back then, it was on a typewriter. I know none of you use a typewriter.
Does anybody know what a typewriter is?
Know?
Oh, wait, I see a lot.
Does anybody have a typewriter at their house? Anybody? One person?
Oh, that's
wow.
awesome.
One person? So we used to have to use a typewriter, and you press the keys really hard. And if you made a mistake, you had to use something called whiteout, where you drew on it with white paint. You basically would paint the letter away and then retype the letter. It was crazy.
It was crazy.
It was crazy.
Absolutely crazy.
But I wrote my first book on a typewriter, and my first story was called John the Mouse, and it was about a mouse who really loved Swiss cheese.
Oh.
So you had the whole story in the first sentence, basically.
Right.
He loved Swiss cheese. That was his motivation. And then I wrote a book, when I was 12, 13, another one, and I actually sent it out to publishers in New York and got rejections, and but they would say, "Oh, how old are you?" And
so how long was the first book?
John the Mouse was about 40 pages. Oh. And then my first book when I was about 12 and a half that I wrote was about 150 pages. So I was crazy even as a little kid, writing long books. And then I sold my first book right out of college. So when I was like 23, 24.
So it's easier, though, for writers now to self-publish.
Everything is easier now. I think we're in a great time right now. If any of you kids want to be writers, it's actually a really wonderful time to write.
How many in the audience is interested in writing? Yeah,
a lot of you kids.
I see a lot of hands up.
Because nowadays there's so many places. I know you probably all watch Disney Channel maybe, or Disney Plus, or I don't know, Netflix. There's a million places to put things that you write now if you become a writer. So it's a wonderful time to write. It's opened up. People can publish their own books. There's Amazon. There's all different ways you can get a story out there. So all you really need is a great story and be willing to sit in your room and write and write and write.
Well, what was one of my questions. What's the biggest hurdle in being a writer? Like when you just say you sit in a room and write and write and write, like how hard is that, and how do you motivate yourself?
Well, I mean, I think the key is obviously to read and read and read as much as you can if you love reading. And then when you figure out what you want to write, maybe it's like something that you were reading or similar, they call it genre, but in a certain area that you like to read. Like if you read a lot of books that are funny, then you might want to write something that's funny. If you read a lot of books about horses, you might want to try and write a book about horses. Whatever it is that you're interested in. A hard part is what Tonya was saying about an outline, is rather than just sit down and start writing, which a lot of people do in the beginning, is sit down and come up with what's going to be in the story from start to finish. So if you can plan out your whole story before you start writing, it actually makes the writing a lot easier. So if you sit there and plan in the beginning, you know, my Charlie is going to meet someone strange and mysterious, and the kid's going to show him a weird rock that he found that he thinks is from space. So that's kind of how this book starts. Mm-hmm. And then you go, what's going to happen after that? They're going to take the rock to the biolab and try and figure out what the rock really is. And that's chapter 2. And then you think, oh no, the rock got stolen, it disappeared. And you go from chapter to chapter until you have a whole outline from beginning to end of the whole book. And if you can do that before you start writing, your writing is going to go much better. So that's kind of one of the keys of writing.
The outline is sort of like the skeleton of the body. It's the framework. It holds everything together, and it will tell the story beautifully. But if you don't have a skeleton, you're just a massive jello, the story's not so good.
How much research goes into one of your books?
I mean, it's a lot in terms of the books that I write for adults. It's many, many weeks of research. So it's usually calling people up who are in the story, going to the places where the story takes place, taking pictures of everything, talking to reading books, you know, getting any documents you can get. For the kids' books, it's more planning out where the scenes are going to take place, and then maybe going there and checking them out. Tonya did some research. Some of this book takes place at a robot factory.
Yes. Can anyone guess a robot factory in town? Raise your hand if you know any robot factories.
Anyone know?
Anyone know?
So there's a real robot factory in town, one of the best and most incredible in the world, and it's called iRobot. And Tonya went over there and hung out with the iRobot people. And yeah.
Yeah, and toured the factory, and they have a great educational program as well. We did change the name to something else in the book, but it's basically based on iRobot.
Did they ask you to change the name?
No, the publisher wanted us to.
Yeah.
Yeah, usually when you hand in the book, one of the books had an amusement park that was just like Disney World. And they say, well, you probably shouldn't just call it Disney World.
Right.
And then when you do a book and there's iRobot, you kind of change the names just in case. But,
right.
in the end, you can make it as similar as you want and make it really cool, yeah.
How about names? Because it's always, you guys have a lot of kids, a lot of characters.
Yeah, I can't remember any of the names.
Right, so how did you come up with the names? Because we've talked to other authors in the past, and I know Ellen Hildebrand, she keeps a running list in a notebook. When she goes to a cocktail party, she'll she'll remember names, or she'll take a page out of her yearbook or something, and she'll just go down the list. So how did you guys come up with?
Idea, actually.
Yeah, she just has a running list of names. So how do you
we
guys
have a funny
do it?
name story.
Yeah, I have a name story. So names are really.
I love your story.
Names are really, really, really hard
Yeah.
because you want a name to sound real but not be distracting from the book, but be interesting enough that it's useful. And so I was writing when I wrote Bringing Down the House about the MIT kids who went to Vegas, I interviewed a kid who was on the MIT blackjack team, did a long interview with him, and at the end he said, whatever you do, just, you can use my information, just don't use my name. Nobody knows I'm doing this. So I went home and I wrote this article that was for the Boston Globe, I think, about the group of MIT kids. And I'm like, I got to make up a name. So I made up the name, Matt Cutler. I wrote Matt Cutler. It sounded like a fake name, whatever. Yeah. And the article comes out, and then I get this phone call, and he's yelling at me on the phone. He's like, what did you do? And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I told you to make up a name. And I said, I did make up a name. Yeah. And he goes, I'm Matt Cutler. So I literally made up the kid's name. Funny. And it was really his name.
Yeah.
So he got really mad.
Yeah, so names are hard.
Names are hard.
Yes.
It's hard to make up fake names that work. And then,
but once you get the right name, like
how did you do it for this book?
The main character in this name, his name is Anthem. And it feels right. You can feel that that's that character, and it just sounds right and feels right, and you know it. So we do kind of go through the names when they're meeting new friends and trying to pick and choose what makes the most sense.
Yeah, and sometimes you change the names as you finish the first draft because you realize two of the names sound too much alike, or someone's name doesn't work, the balance is off. Naming is hard. I mean, I used to go through phone books and just pick random names out of the phone book and say that's the name I'm going to use.
Right.
And then when you sell a movie, before they make the movie, they go through and they have to check every name because they don't want to use someone's name who's really in that same business.
Wow.
So they actually run all the names through a system to figure out whether the names match any real people who do whatever it is that character's doing.
And has that happened a lot in your
I mean, they
writing?
always change all the names, or all the names are pretty much changed. When they made 21, they made the main character's name Ben for me. So that was fun. But they do change the names of the characters, a lot.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to read from the book a little bit?
Yeah, sure. We'll read a little bit from chapter 1. And if you don't have the book yet, we have this wonderful bookseller, Winchester Bookends, out front. You can grab a copy. And they have generously agreed to donate 15% of the sales today to our chosen charity, Raising a Reader. So feel good about supporting local and supporting Raising a Reader as you grab a book for the end of your summer reading.
And it's good because Ben and Tonya can sign them, and they're great holiday gifts too.
Yeah,
we'll great holiday gifts.
Happy to sign anything out front at the end of the event. All right, how do I do this with a mic and a book? A warm summer wind pulled at Charlie Lewis's hair as he navigated his way through the thick woods, each of his steps cushioned by the dewy grass that blanketed the narrow trail beneath his feet. An errant branch reached for his face, like the curled fingers of some terrifying apparition. Charlie did his best to ignore it, ducking below the leaves. He was determined not to let anything slow his progress, break his will. His nerves were sparking off like fireworks on the 4th of July, but he pushed the fear deep down. If he turned back now, he knew he'd never forgive himself. The air was humid, mossy, and moist in his nostrils, even though it was only the first week of June. 3 days earlier, Charlie's summer vacation had officially begun. Usually this was his favorite time of the year, the pressures of school dwindling in the rearview mirror, months of science camps, swimming pools, and slumber parties with friends ahead. But at the moment, memories of summer and school were far from his thoughts. Charlie had been moving through the overgrown forest for what seemed like hours, tripping over roots and careening through dried-up stream beds, and every step seemed to take him farther away from the warm, comforting world he understood, of science and history and logic, and towards something else, something dark and confusing and scary. And suddenly, right in front of him, there was a flash, as bright as lightning, so stark white that it made him blink and stumble. In that first split second, eyes watering, off balance, Charlie still had the presence of mind to reach for his camera. He had been carrying the darn thing around for days, an old digital point-and-shoot model that he found in his dad's desk drawer, and was sure this was the right moment to use it. No one really used these type of cameras anymore, unless concerns of electromagnetic waves were involved. He hurriedly snapped open the lens cap and hit the tiny black plastic button on the top, attempting to turn the old beast on. Silence. He had pushed this button so many times before and had always heard the familiar beep of the camera going on. How could it fail him now? He squinted down at the camera's casing and realized the LED light wasn't on. No power. He quickly reached into his pocket and dug out a spare battery. He ripped the compartment open, tossed the dead battery to the side, shoved the fresh one in, and hit the button. And again, no beep, no LED light, no power. How was this possible? One burned-out battery, okay, maybe, but two? Charlie looked up from the camera, bewildered, when just as quickly as it had come, the bright light was gone. The forest once again plunged into pitch blackness. Charlie blinked several times to adjust his eyes. Still nothing. No light, no shadows, just ebony sky above. An overwhelming, enveloping darkness, one that was almost liquid, like oil blanketing everything. And then, from somewhere ahead, there was a sound, a rustling, tree branches being pushed to the side, something moving along the ground through the trees toward him. Charlie froze. He had hiked these very woods before. A year earlier, on a camping trip with his dad. Normally, sounds in the woods didn't scare him, but this rustling, scraping even, was something different. It certainly wasn't his friends, 3 of whom he knew were somewhere behind him in the forest. He'd foolishly sprinted ahead when they'd first arrived. His eagerness, curiosity, and yes, disbelief at what they had found over the past few weeks getting the better of him, spurring him to take unnecessary risks. And now he regretted not pacing himself so they could keep up. And then suddenly the sound stopped, and a strange burning plastic smell filled the air. Charlie coughed, momentarily choking, and just as he was about to turn around and sprint back the way he'd come, the bright light exploded in front of him again. Charlie gasped, falling backward for a second, then caught his footing and peered through the trees. Everything was suddenly visible. He could see in that instant that 10 yards in front of him there was an opening in the woods. The opening was circular, with a perfect ring of trees surrounding it, and at the center, Charlie could make out a formation of rocks, also in a circle, mimicking the trees. "Wow," Charlie whispered. What the heck was he looking at? Without thinking, he lifted his camera, flicked the switch, but it was still dead. Charlie steadied himself, then shielded his eyes with his hand, trying to get a glimpse at what was creating the incredibly bright light. But before he could see anything, the brightness flashed on and off again, like a lightning storm. Then the forest was enveloped in blackness. Charlie kept his eyes open, his neck craned, but there was nothing but blackness. And in that moment, Charlie realized the moon and stars had disappeared too.
Ooh.
Ooh.
What do you guys think happened there? Anyone?
Silence.
What do you think, sweetie?
All right, I think that trees by the side has a natural scientific explanation. Some trees grow with the wind to a side sometimes. But the rocks, that's impossible. That's scientifically impossible.
The rocks. I know the rocks in
You're
the
right,
circle
it's
is creepy.
scientifically
It's very
impossible.
creepy.
I like that. So who wrote that chapter? Did you write that?
I mean,
We
we
wrote it
both.
together.
It's a real combination.
Yeah.
She'll write some of them, and then I'll go through the sentences that she's written, and it's kind of a mix. Like I recognize some of the words,
Yeah.
but I'm sure she recognizes some of the words too.
Yeah.
So,
It's definitely a mix.
yeah.
Do you guys have any questions for Ben and Tonya about writing or reading? Did you guys read to your kids a lot when they were very young?
Oh, yeah. We were
all the
big,
way
big
through?
readers to our kids all the time. And then
Asher's
Asher, troublemaker.
We still are.
We still read to Aria a lot.
Yep.
Asher
We're reading The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind right now with Aria.
Is that the one you're reading right now? Yeah. We're reading a lot of, what was the one with the bears that have armor on them?
Oh, The Golden Compass.
Golden Compass
by Philip
books,
Pullman.
Which
Ooh,
we
that's
We're
a
also
good
reading
one.
that one.
Those are good. But yeah, we're big believers in the more you read to kids, the better it is for everybody. And there's nothing more important than kids reading. So we're forcing our kids. No, they love reading. And when I was little, my dad had a rule that we had to read 2 books a week before we were allowed to watch TV.
Wow.
Every week. So
That's a good rule.
I know we should institute it. But
what are some of your favorite kids' books? What's your favorite?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's hard to remember. When I was a kid, I was definitely into the Encyclopedia Brown books. There was a book called The Electric Book. I don't know if anybody remembers that book, where it was almost like the whole world became a video game, and everything he
should bring
wrote
that back.
would happen.
Yeah.
He'd write, and then it would happen, and he'd write, and it would happen.
Oh, that's
And
so
it's
cool.
probably what I'm trying to model my life after.
Yeah.
Is right, and then whatever I write happens. It was called The Electric Book. What did you like?
What were some of yours, Tonya?
I loved the Encyclopedia Brown books as well. I loved some of the bubblegum books, the Sweet Valley High books. They weren't great literature, but they were fun.
Yeah.
And Beverly Cleary, and
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I became obsessed with like science fiction books when I got a little older, and things like that. And then the Lord of the Rings, Hobbit stuff, and then as I got older, I moved more into sort of more adult or fiction stuff. But I was just a voracious reader as a kid.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any questions for Ben and Tonya? Callum?
So what do you think are the main differences between writing for adults and writing for kids? And which one do you like more?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, writing for adults, for me, is it's funny. I write quicker for adults. So I write a book in 2 or 3 months when I write my adult books. And these books actually take a lot longer, even though they're a lot shorter, which is interesting. Writing for books, I think you have a little bit more, in a weird way, a little bit more freedom, because you're not have to be as controlling about how you write necessarily.
you mean writing for fiction?
I mean, adults.
Oh,
basically.
adults, okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I like both. I think they're both a lot of fun. They're just very, very sort of a different process. And writing by myself versus writing with Tonya is probably the bigger difference than writing adults and writing kids. Writing with someone is a very different way of writing than writing just alone in your room kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you. And also, Tonya mentioned there, like, what do you think the differences are between fiction and nonfiction, where, like, you're researching things?
So it's interesting. I'm a fiction writer. I'm a nonfiction writer who writes his nonfiction like it's fiction, and my fiction like it's nonfiction. Mm-hmm. So the way I write nonfiction is I write thrillers that happen to be true. So when you read them, they read like a thriller or a fictional thriller. So for me, there's not a huge difference in the writing part. It's just the research is very different. So although I do intense research for my fiction, it's not talking to people and getting their actual story. It's figuring out things and then making up a story. But I think nonfiction and fiction are very similar. Reality can be just like a movie, right? It can be just like a story, and the best true stories are the ones that seem like they're fake. So yeah, I try and do them the same.
And the best fake stories are the ones that seem like they're true.
Exactly. So it's all kind of one and the same.
Do you have a favorite project, a favorite story?
Of the books that I've written? It's hard to say. It's kind of like picking between your children, although that's easy to do. Okay. But no. It's tricky. I've written a lot of books that I loved writing while I was writing them, but then you look at, like, The Social Network was just an incredible movie. So the experience of that movie was, beyond anything I can imagine. I have a new movie coming out in 2 weeks called Dumb Money, which is based on a book I wrote about the whole GameStop craziness. If you all remember when GameStop went insane and all these people made lots of money. And that book was a blast to write, and now I'm in the midst of getting ready for a movie to come out. And so that's, probably most on my mind right now. But looking back at my career, I would say Bringing Down the House was the book that most kind of changed my life, and was just a wild
whirlwind.
moment. Yeah,
because that was like his return. That was his first foray into nonfiction.
Right.
He had written published 7 fiction books before.
But that was my first book anybody actually read. So it was definitely a big moment in my life. So it's hard to pick. I mean, everyone has been a lot of fun.
I bet.
Yeah. It's funny. So I was just doing an interview talking about this. I was watching it happen on a Wednesday, and the stock went from $20 to like $500 in a day. And I almost bought it because I was actually watching it as it happened. And then instead I wrote a book about it. Yeah, I mean, it was a gambling moment where I came very close to buying it. I don't know if you know the story, but it went crazy up and down really fast. So I'm kind of glad I didn't buy it because I would have bought it exactly the wrong moment, I think. But it was a fascinating. Yeah, I did not buy GameStop though. But one of the people I wrote about was a college kid who basically took $5,000 out of his tuition money and made $300,000 in a period of a few days. So a lot of fortunes were made.
And it's a local story too, right?
Yeah,
the guys from
the
here.
main character's from Brockton, and he's a roaring kitty, he called himself, and it's a really fascinating story about this guy who just fell in love with GameStop, the company GameStop, and talked millions of people into to buying the stock. Yeah.
Any other questions? Anything?
Yeah.
Christine?
So when you're making or you're thinking about your next book, is the option for a movie part of the process at all?
For my adult books, yes. I don't write a book unless I've sold a movie. So I actually do things a little differently.
Okay.
I see a big story, I write a 10-page treatment, I sell the treatment in Hollywood, and then I go and sell the book. So my dream as an author was always to have a paperback that said on it, "Now a major motion picture." I wasn't trying to win a
Well
Pulitzer. I wasn't trying to win a... Yeah, so my dream was always movies. So for me, the process is this going to make a great movie? And then I write the book with that in mind. For our kids' book, it's very different. It's more we're trying to take a great story and have we're not thinking in that way. Yeah. So, but for my adult books, I'm definitely conscious of the film side of it. Yeah.
So once you've sold the story, do you have any control in what happens with the movie, or is it all you just giving it right?
That's a great question. You're asking the same questions NPR asked me earlier. Yeah, the most control you have as an author is who you sell it to. So you choose who you sell it to, and you try and sell it to people who are the most talented and the most likely to make the movie you want to make, and are the most likely to get the movie made. Once you've sold it, you're involved when the screenplay is being written. So the screenwriters will come and hang out with you, and you'll talk them through your story, and they'll ask you lots of questions. Once it's beyond the screenplay, the director really is the king of the movie. You go to the set, you hang out there, and people will ask you things, but you don't have any power. You don't have any power once it's moving forwards. And it's probably good that you don't, because I don't know how to make a movie. I know how to write a story. So you just choose who you sell it to and hope you sell it to the best people you can get who are going to make it. But they'll tell you who they're casting or who they're thinking about. They'll tell you what they're thinking. And if you have a real problem with something, you could probably say something. But for the most part, you're watching it go as you become a part of the group that's making the movie, but you're not in control of anything. Yeah.
And now with the writer's strike and the actor's strike, we were just talking before we started that Dumb Money's coming out, but because of the strike, Ben's going to be doing all of the publicity for the entire movie.
I'm talking about the book, and I'm promoting the book, which
Right.
is great. And unfortunately, the actors won't be able to do anything until the strike ends.
Which may be after this comes out.
Yeah,
so.
we'll see. We're hoping that the studios do the right thing and give the writers and the actors what they want, and so that we can all move forward happily. But it's an interesting time for Hollywood for sure, where the future is coming and nobody knows what to do with it, with AI and all of these questions about how things are going to get written and made in the future.
Yeah, it needed to happen.
Yeah, it's
like
the moment
now,
of it.
Right. to
But
kind of
we would
figure it
like to
out.
see all our actors at the movie premiere and stuff. So we'll see what
Well,
happens.
Pete Davidson's in it. So
Pete
Did you get to meet
Davidson, Seth
Pete?
Rogen.
I didn't get to meet
Tonya?
him. Did you get to meet him?
I haven't met Pete yet. Sebastian Stan from the Marvel movies. I got to hang out with him.
And the movie was filmed, I mean, and this is off of the children's topic, but the movie was filmed still during COVID. So everything was shot very singularly. Like
It's a very carefully done movie.
Only
yeah.
one or two actors in each scene. So even though it appears that everybody's all together, it was very
They were being safe.
pandemic
Yeah, everyone
safe.
had to be
Yeah.
safe. But it's a great cast. It's Seth Rogen, Pete Davidson, Shailene Woodley, America Ferrera from the Barbie movie now. And we've got Vincent D'Onofrio, if you remember him, and Nick Offerman.
Huge cast.
Paul Dano plays Roaring Kitty. It's a great cast, yeah. So, really fun.
So, what advice would you give all these beautiful children that are sitting here if they love reading and they want to write more? Like, what are some tips you can give to them?
Well, one piece of advice that Ben gave me as my mentor was you can't sell an empty piece of paper. So just get the words down on paper, no matter what it is, as long as you get them out of your head and onto the paper, then you've got something. So
Yeah.
that was a really good piece of advice
That's
that
good, yeah.
I share with other emerging writers as well.
Yeah, read a lot and try and write a little bit every day if you can. And if you find a story that you really want to write, outline it and then sit down and just try and write it. And don't worry about if things aren't working perfectly. Don't try and be perfect. Just try and get it on the page as good as you can, and then find some friends who want to read it. And I think that's the important thing. Yeah.
As I said, as you said, it's easy to self-publish now. So you
Yeah.
could you can write a book, and you can put it out there on Amazon and have all your friends and family buy it, and you're off and running.
Exactly. That's all it takes.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank
That's
you. And
really
we'll see you
fun.
on September 20th
That's right.
for
Absolutely.
booking a movie at Showcase Cinema's Legacy Place.